I'd like to say a few things about spiritual self-care, as well as the care for others as we approach the end of life, or as we find ourselves supporting others approaching the end of their lives, coming up to the dying process, going through the dying process, and the period immediately afterwards. It is an extremely deep and sensitive subject, and I do not pretend to be able to cover every aspect of it. So in this talk, really, my intention is to share what I perceive to be important reflections, perhaps some of the reflections that we might not make when initially thinking about how we can care for ourselves and care for others. The end of the life is a profound transition. It's as profound as the moment of being born. And in many ways, for most of us, or most beings, it is even more challenging. It's something that we know to be a certainty from the moment that we're born, although we may not reflect upon it from that moment, but from the moment that we are born, it is a certainty that all of us will face the end of this life and the experience of dying and passing away. Coming to terms with it during the course of our life and making peace with the inevitable truth of death is, I believe, one of the ways that we can allow ourselves or open ourselves up to life more fully. And indeed, it's possible to argue that it is our denial of the truth of death, or our unwillingness to accept the inevitability of it and to live in denial of it, that often shrinks or hinders our capacity to fully engage in life. So it's an enormous subject. It's not morose or negative to reflect deeply on the nature of impermanence and the certainty of death. The Buddha suggests that it is one of the prerequisite kammatthans or meditations that we should do if we are seeking to achieve any kind of liberation in this very life. And of course, regardless of our spiritual context or the spiritual context to our lives, it's an enormous thing that affects all of us. All of us are going to find ourselves close to someone who's dying. We're going to find ourselves facing the inevitable truth of the loss of those who are dear to us and those we love, and we're going to have to face the inevitable truth that our life one day will come to an end. So it's an enormous subject. I mean, we've done whole retreats on this in the past. We've also covered off in our death and dying program the sort of nursing care or medical care or physical needs of one who is approaching death. I won't say much about that here. I want to talk about the subject of spiritual welfare within the context of death. So, let's talk first and foremost about how we might care for ourselves in the lead up to the end of our life, which basically starts the day we're born, and as we in particular come to the certainty or the certain knowledge or the recognition of the fact that our life is going to end in the near future. So what are the things that reduce our suffering in these circumstances, and what are the things that multiply it? I suppose ultimately my intention and objective and wish behind giving this talk is to give guidance on how suffering might be reduced as much as possible as we go through the dying process. So I'm going to talk about this with regards to the three aspects of our consciousness, being our conscious mind, our unconscious mind, and the ground of our being pure awareness or Rigpa or our Buddha nature, or call it whatever you wish, our higher nature. Now, all of these three aspects of ourselves are extremely relevant to the dying process and how we experience it. So I think our initial instinct when comforting others or looking to support others or reflecting upon what our needs are as we approach death or hold the space for someone else who is approaching death is, of course, to make people and ourselves as comfortable as possible. It's very, very important, because the more we are physically afflicted, the more likely we are to be thrust into unwholesome mental states of extreme aversion and intolerance, and it may well be very hard for us to elevate our mind to positive mental states. So comfort is an extremely important factor. Doing what we can to physically be comfortable so that our conscious mind is as much as at ease as possible, so that we do not accumulate what we call death proximate unwholesome karma through being thrust into really strong, overwhelming states of anguish, anger, fear, aversion, etc. Now, there is a school of thought that suggests it is a noble process to not tend to our pain and to try to effectively pass through the discomfort of the body breaking apart at the end of the life as consciously or mindfully as possible. Now, it is important that we are as conscious as we can be, but only to the point where our mind is not thrust into extreme states of aversion. So my guidance on this is that as soon as we find ourselves unable to bear with equanimity the discomfort that we are facing, then we should seek the medical care or whatever medical care we can to make ourselves physically comfortable. Now, a lot of people have apprehension about being sedated, or the idea of being sedated, or taking pain medication. And the argument is that it numbs our mindfulness. But our mindfulness is only serving us when it is met, or it arises together with a wholesome mind. So to be aware of the fact that we are in physical pain and to not be able to bear it is not of great help to us. So it is important that we are as comfortable as possible. And if we practice meditation, we will find ways to rest in positive mental states while somewhat sedated or somewhat medicated. So I've looked at this and I've watched people passing through the end phase of their life, and I've looked at those who have not taken the pain medication that was offered, not taken the sedatives that were offered. And it takes an extraordinary strength of mind to pass through the inevitable discomfort of the physical body breaking apart. And very few of us will have that. And so we should see that it is a blessing, and therefore we can see it as a good fortune if the means are available to us to be comfortable or to be made more comfortable. So that's the first thing, our physical comfort. And then to make sure that our environment is calm and peaceful so that we can rest. Now, one of the things that's important in this is that we also find a way whereby those who are supporting us, loving us, caring for us, holding our space, are as unvexed or as supported as possible in their efforts to support and care for us. And for this, it's important to make reflection on the Buddha's teachings on being of few needs and being easy to serve. Now, we may have things that we would like. We have an idea in our mind, when I die, I'd like to be in this kind of environment and these things going on. But if creating that environment causes a tremendous upheaval and doesn't allow us to be actually in a peaceful state or a peaceful environment, then it is a great service to ourselves and to those who are caring for us to allow ourselves to be placed in the most suitable and the most experienced and loving care we can. Now, it's not, although it would be wonderful if those who really love and are close, love us and are close to us, were able to do all of our caring as we approach death, it's almost certainly the case that they are not skilled, trained, or equipped, and in truth are likely to be facing a very challenging, emotional, overwhelming experience by caring for us as we face the end of our life. Now, of course, there's an opportunity to raise ourselves up in service and care for our loved ones, but also it may well be the case that we do not have the spiritual tenacity to remove ourselves and to really hold calm and peaceful and steady space for our loved one as they approach death. And this is where it's important to make honest reflection on this. You know, to have a family together is a beautiful thing, and of course, wherever possible, should be sought as the, one of the factors that we should try to have. We should try to have our family and our loved ones around us. But if there is an overwhelming sense of anxiety within those who are charged with the care, then the best thing we can do is to allow ourselves to be cared for by professionals And there are highly trained, extraordinary human beings who hold space for those approaching the end of their life. Palliative care nurses, care staff at end-of-life care homes and hospices. And these tend to be very beautiful environments because they are no longer medical environments. They are caring, spiritual, supporting environments for those who are facing the inevitability of death. So there is an openness and acceptance in this kind of environment. So I always recommend that wherever possible, we recruit the support, not expecting them to do everything and all of the caring, but the space holding support of those who are equipped, experienced, and trained in the loving, caring space holding of end of life, of the end of life process. Because this takes so much pressure off the family group or the close, those who are close, and allows them to enter into the space of caring, loving, sharing, honoring this extremely sacred space, which is the end of someone's life. So to ask our immediate family to do all of the caring for us may be something that they aren't skilled in doing, which creates a tremendous amount of stress and anxiety. And this is where these wonderful organizations like the Macmillan nurses or palliative care nurses or hospices have such a beautiful role to play in the end of life. And then, of course, obviously, we create an environment that is as stress-free and supportive and peaceful as possible. There's lots of things we can say about that. I don't want to go too far into it because I want to talk more about our spiritual care. Now, what is going on in our conscious mind is only a small fraction of what's going on within us. In particular, or also, and in particular, this is very relevant with regards to approaching the end of our life. Many people are very afraid of dying. Now, one of the reasons for this is the uncertainty about it. Of course, that is totally understandable. But another is a sense somewhere inside us, and usually a hidden sense, that we may not have lived our life worthily enough. We may be carrying shame, guilt, regret, or remorse around the way we have lived our lives. And we hold a fear around taking that with us and the implications of that in the dying process. Now, for this, one of the most powerful, liberating, and supportive practices that we can engage in or help others to engage in is the testifying to, or the disclosure, we could even use the word confessing, the speaking up and speaking out of those things that we hold within us that we are ashamed of, we feel guilt around, we regret, and we carry remorse. Because the disclosing of it and the asking for forgiveness releases an enormous amount of the psychological, psychic, and karmic charge that we are carrying around our past actions that we regret. The karma of doing something regrettable is one thing. The mental karma of rumination or living in denial or burying it or having to hide it or carrying guilt and shame our entire life, this is quite often much weightier on account of the fact it's repetitive than the actual deeds that we've come to regret. And so there is a tremendous power in speaking up and acknowledging these deeds that I have done in the course of my life that I deeply and profoundly regret, I disclose and acknowledge them. I just share them so that they're not just buried within me. And all spiritual traditions and religious traditions would have had a mechanism by which we can express our regrets openly, be it to a spiritual guide or spiritual teacher. Now, whatever our religious beliefs are, then that's probably where we should turn when it comes to expressing and freeing ourselves and liberating ourselves of regret, remorse, shame, and guilt. It's even possible to do it before an altar to your teacher, your master, your spiritual guide, the Buddha if you're a Buddhist, the Bodhisattvas, or to God. But to open yourself and acknowledge, but also to yourselves, these are the things that I have done in my life that I deeply regret. I acknowledge it. I ask forgiveness. I forgive myself. I pray for forgiveness for any being who may have suffered on my account. I pray no being shall suffer on my account. If there is anger and hatred in the hearts and minds of any being who I have wronged on account of my actions towards them of body, speech, and mind, I pray that that anger and hatred shall fade from their minds, that they shall not suffer more on my account. So we forgive ourselves, we ask forgiveness of those we have wronged, even if we cannot put ourselves in front of them. If there are great issues that have arisen between us and other people, other beings, then we can write, we can ask for forgiveness. We can reach out to those people to try to dismantle the structure of rancor or resentment or hatred that might be in place. This is extremely powerful and important. And then to expedite that or to support the freeing of ourselves from these acts that we regret, we do our best to make merit and dedicate that merit to the freeing of ourselves and others from our actions that have created suffering. And the subject of merit is also extremely important. Now, as we approach the end of our life, we may well find that we're so incapacitated it's difficult to make merit. But there are ways we can make merit. One of them is by being as easy to serve as possible, to accept the care that comes our way, to not allow ourselves to suffer any more than is necessary for whatever reason we might have rationalized within us. It is a merit to expedite or to diminish the suffering that we experience. To allow ourselves, through the way that we choose to act, to suffer more than we need is the karma of lack of regard for ourselves. And, and this is a strange but very, very deep tendency that arises quite often, is the feeling that I need to suffer in order to be lovable. Now, if we've got this mindset where we feel to allow ourselves to go through extraordinary amounts of suffering will be a means by which we will feel loved, we are actually inflicting suffering upon ourselves and inflicting suffering upon others, because those who love us, watch us suffering, and of course are upset and challenged by having to watch it. So obviously there is that suffering that cannot be avoided. You know, we've got sickness that's leading to the end of our life. The very end of the life is always uncomfortable or challenging. But this is where it's important to allow ourselves to be cared for in whatever ways are available to us, because that is a service to ourselves and to those who are caring for us. And the degree to which we diminish our suffering in the lead up to our death is a reflection of the degree to which we have diminished the suffering we will have to take with us. So the more comfortable we are, the more at ease we are, the deeper the peace we've reached at the point of the end of our life, the more we have resolved those things that are the cause of future suffering. So this is very deep and significant, and I think probably the single most important aspect of spiritual care in death and dying. So to liberate ourselves of our regrets by expressing them, however painful, so that we've allowed ourselves to be seen. You know, I think it's quite common for everyone who believes in God, or most of those of us who believe in God, to assume that we will be seen in our entirety in our death process. But to have allowed that to happen prior to our death, I see and acknowledge within me these things that I regret. I find love for myself. I recognize my confusion in the doing of these deeds. To generate liberating insight around our past misconduct or woeful conduct or harmful conduct is to transform the karma of it. And thereafter, it becomes an invitation to evolve. If we look with deep regret at actions we wish we hadn't done, but on account of looking deeply, reflect upon it in such a way that we transform the quality of our mind so that we would never do such a thing again, then for all the suffering it's created in ourselves or others, it has reduced the tendency towards future suffering by transforming our mind, which is what the power of forgiveness is. So it's not just for the purposes of liberating our unconscious from the weight of regret and remorse. We forgive ourselves by seeing deeply enough into the suffering that could have allowed us to do deeds which were harmful to ourselves and others. So some of us our weightiest karma is around not caring for ourselves, self-negligence. And our weightiest karma is around not caring for others, negligence, thoughtlessness, hurtfulness to others. So we have to look at that and understand that where we might have judged ourselves, that judgment is only in the face of not seeing the pain that we were experiencing that prompted this action that caused suffering to myself or others. So when we see and acknowledge our pain, we look further down the line. We say, I may have been suffering then on account of past actions which I cannot see. And in my suffering then, I did deeds to myself and others that caused them and me to suffer. I acknowledge that suffering that I was experiencing. I forgive myself for my past misdeeds, and I forgive myself for the misdeeds in this life. And I make a determination that I should not do such a thing again. I pray that no being shall suffer on my account. I pray that I shall not suffer in the future on account of negligence towards myself. Now that we may have to do it a number of times, lighten the burden that we carry within our unconscious mind, which is part of our consciousness that transitions with us through the dying process. The more we've met it before we die, the more loving, equanimous, accepting of it we can be. Or what we call grace, the higher state of grace we might find for ourselves as we come to the dying process. So, and this is where the role of caregivers and those who are supporting someone coming to the end of the life, where it's so important that we can openly hold space where we feel able to encourage the person we're caring for to unburden and to speak their truth and to transform and let go their regrets and remorse in some way. And if any of the misdeeds that their regrets may be on account of misdeeds towards us, maybe we're children and we feel our parents have treated us badly and we're caring for them, there is a profound capacity for healing and transformation that may have to start with us. Our parents may feel great shame around the way we've suffered on their account. We may feel tremendous rancor, bitterness and resentment on account of the suffering we've experienced on their account. But we cannot see the causal chain that lay behind those things or the karma that had gone on before. So we can only come to the place of acknowledging, surely we must have created suffering for each other in this life and countless lives beforehand. Let us pray that that cycle of suffering ends here. It starts with me, that I shall completely forgive before the end of their life my mother, my father, my brother, my sister, whoever it is. I pray they shall not suffer on my account. I pray I shall never again suffer on their account. I forgive them completely. Now, if we can approach someone who's carrying shame and regret around past misdeeds, or it may just be ignorance and denial, may not even have come to regret, but if we can approach them with the spirit of forgiveness and love, i.e., we're in the caring side, we aren't facing the end of our life, so we aren't as challenged as the person who's about to die. We've got time. They haven't. So it's very noble and often extremely selfless to reach a place as a carer or a family member who is anticipating the passing of one who we feel has wronged us, to find the grace within ourselves and the generosity of spirit to forgive and to let it be known that we forgive. This is a great act of care and love to someone who is about to pass away and take with them the mind that they have accumulated in this life. It is an extraordinary act of generosity to find that forgiveness, even if we've suffered tremendously. In fact, the more we've suffered, the greater is the act of generosity and kindness to find forgiveness, the more liberating it becomes. So it is almost certainly going to be difficult, but we can make reflection in finding forgiveness for this person who has caused me such suffering in this life. I pray that I free both them and myself from this suffering, and we do. Forgiveness frees us of the suffering we are carrying, because it's almost certainly the case that the suffering was something that was done in the past. Our suffering is not on account of what was done to us, but the way that we continue to react in the knowledge that it was done. That's the mental suffering. So we can free ourselves of the mental suffering through finding forgiveness. It is extremely powerful and liberating and can change the trajectory of our entire life if we can do it. And it's something that we will not have the same ability to do if the person who's harmed us dies before we've forgiven them. So it's an area worthy of the deepest reflection. And if you're finding it difficult to reach that place of forgiveness, then seeking spiritual guidance and support and counsel to help you get to that place is extremely worth doing. So the unburdening of the unconscious mind is more important than the state of our conscious mind. And the unburdening of our unconscious mind can be done in deep states where we may not be extremely lucid at an ordinary cognitive level. It may well happen while we are in the threshold of ordinary consciousness. So, allowing ourselves to be comforted physically. When we experience comfort, we experience relief. As we experience relief, the heart lifts a little. The ground becomes more fertile for doing this deep reconciliation work. It's very, very hard for anyone to go through such a deep process as forgiving self and others in the face of great hardships and suffering, while we are actually really physically in great distress. And this is the real value of palliative end of life care and environment and setting, to create an energetic support where we can find in some way access to that loving space. Not only because it is liberating our unconscious stock of karma, or allowing us to start the process of liberating our unconscious stock of karma by transforming it prior to death through deep reflection and love and self-love and forgiveness and all of these things. But it brings us closer to the true ground of our being, which is pure awareness. Now, we may have meditated all our lives and not actually had access in anything more than a fleeting moment to the true ground of our being. And we may have subscribed very much to the notion that there is a loving intelligence behind our lives that is all loving, all compassionate, all forgiving, all knowing, fully awake. But we haven't yet experienced it. So it's not what we call Bhavanamaya Panya. Now, I'm going to tell a little story about my father's passing away because it illustrates an important point. My father was a meditator and he practiced his Qigong and he did everything he possibly could to keep himself up and to keep his spirits up physically, to put a brave face mentally upon extraordinary hardship he was facing, but also an extraordinary amount of fear he had around the idea that he was going to die. So he did all the right things, but that fear lay deep in his unconscious, as it does for most of us. And it may well be that we're not practiced enough in meditation yet to have accessed that with full awareness, where we can actually transform that fear with full mindfulness in ordinary consciousness. Now, one day, he was sitting in the conservatory at his house, and he was just nodding into a sort of afternoon nap. And then he started moaning, and he started groaning, and extraordinary sounds started coming out of him. And amongst those extraordinary sounds were, "It's so beautiful. It's so beautiful. It's so beautiful." And he was appearing to be delirious. And my mother, bless her, was so alarmed by what was happening to him, thinking that he might be about to die. Understandable. So she approached him and shook him and said, Rex, are you all right? Are you all right? And he sort of, in a start, came round, rather shocked. "Oh, I'm still here." Now, that experience completely transformed how he met the end of his life. Because in that moment of being at peace, sitting quietly with himself, for one reason or another, who knows what it was, he was touched by something that showed him the ground of his being, and he saw that it was beautiful. The power of that experience to transform what many years of meditation had not been able to free him from was extraordinary. Which is why it's very important that we allow ourselves, or do what we can, if we are fortunate enough, to rest in state of peace as much as we can as we approach death. Because even if we are highly medicated, even if we are in a coma, in fact, when we are medicated to the point that we are on the threshold of losing our consciousness, a large part of our awareness is resting in our unconscious. And if we come peacefully enough to rest so that we do not shake up the stock of unconscious sankharas or reactive states or karmic traces in our heart base, we do find ourselves resting in the clear light of bliss whilst physically experiencing ease. And this is so important and healing. You know, I've just said my father would not have been able to transform his fear with mindfulness and reflection. For all the beautiful practice he'd done and the courage he's shown, he was still afraid that of the idea that he was not worthy. And seeing that he was, through having that, being touched in that way before he died, meant that he could approach the end of his life lovingly. And as a result, the tail end of his life was a very beautiful affair. And he died with love in his heart. Bravely. So I tell this story because it happened to him in a peaceful, quiet moment while he was alone and not experiencing pain. And in that moment he was touched by, we don't know. It doesn't really matter. Point being, he was touched. He saw something that moved him and transformed him. So that space that we enter into when we're sleeping, that space we enter into in the threshold between consciousness and unconsciousness, that place we rest while we're even in a coma. Extraordinary transformative work can be done there. And in order to get to these subtle states of profound bliss and peace and love, our heart base has to be undisturbed. And this is why it's important to allow ourselves to be as comfortable as we can and to not suffer physically any more than is necessary. Now, that's, I think, probably the most important thing. The unburdening of regret and remorse, and in some way gaining access to the ground of our being, so that we liberate our unconscious mind, as much as we are able, and that we come to rest in the ground of our being, so we've got a greater chance of recognizing it as we die. You know, many people will find themselves lying in a bed, incapacitated for long periods of time. Those times are ripe for awakening, or being touched, or for coming to a state of natural rest, and at least getting closer to our true nature, our high nature, the ground of our being. And the more we are familiar with that, the more we are likely to recognize it as we pass away. Now, I'm not going to talk about in great detail the act of dying, except to say that for most people, the very last gasp will be, challenging. But some people, many people, will be able to, if we practice loving kindness, and if we are supported in loving kindness in the leading up to it, and we make recitations on loving kindness, may I be happy, may all beings be happy. Through repetition, we create a trace in our conscious and unconscious mind in the lead up to our death. It is possible that our death moment may be met with love. And my father's last words were, I love, I love, I love. Beautiful. He practiced so much loving kindness in the lead up to his death. It's just what was happening in his mind. So, trying to encourage the most supporting and loving attitude in the moment of death, that's the fading away of the conscious mind. Thereafter, our awareness comes to, as the physical body and our awareness, it breaks down, and the sense bases break down, our consciousness cannot appear in the sense doors anymore. Gradually, our consciousness withdraws, and we are no longer able to interact with the external world. At that moment, awareness comes to rest in the heart base, and out of Bhavanga, our unconscious, the stock of impressions that we've accumulated starts to arise. Now, where our attention gets pulled in that process is extremely important. I will probably give another talk explaining in more detail that process. But the more resonance we have with positive mental states and their surfacing, rather than resonance with unwholesome states, as we go through the dying process, the more likely we are that our attention comes to land on wholesome mental states, on wholesome states rather than unwholesome states, and that wholesome karma or wholesome consciousness becomes what we call the rebirth link in consciousness. So this again is one of the reasons it's so valuable to have discharged as much of our negativity as we can from our unconscious mind prior to dying. That it's not just bottled up. Gosh, I'm holding on, I'm keeping it within me, I'm keeping it within me, and I'm dying, and now it's coming out, and it's just, I've done no work with it. Of course we review or meet our regrets and remorse with regret and remorse. And the opportunity to transform it into forgiveness and love has now passed. So we can see it's extremely important to do everything we can to reach forgiveness and to offer forgiveness and to forgive ourselves and forgive others, whether we're a carer for someone dying or whether we are the person dying. Now, there is a period. Now, it's not always easy after death, where if at all possible, the body should be left to rest quietly. The spirit, as it withdraws from the physical body, remains present in the place at which it's died for some time, and then begins a period of wandering. So that immediate period to sit, hold space and homage that person or in honor of the person who has died, if you are present, that is a very sanctified space. You can still send loving kindness at this moment. Once the person has withdrawn completely, they will not be able to receive our loving kindness. We can only share merits, transfer merits. So we can hold space, and for about 7 days after the passing away, so after a period of time in the location of the death, the spirit will start to wander. And the first place it is likely to go is a familiar space, looking for a feeling of security, not yet understanding that we have passed away. So as a carer, the next thing we should do after the person died is to go to the space, maybe their home or the place of the family home, or where they would most feel comforted, and set up vigil there. Create a shrine, picture a candle, light incense, take it in turns. You don't have to do it 24 hours a day, but sit in honor and love of the person who's passed, and share their loving kindness, and continue, if necessary, to offer forgiveness, to send love and support, and to comfort them by just being present. They're in the intermediary state. They haven't passed away beyond this world yet. They're still around, and you'll know by the sense that you can feel them still around you in some way. Now, the period of time that this goes on for varies. From my experience, it can be sometimes just a day or less, or it can be up to a week. It's not often the case that someone stays much longer than that, but it can be. And this is all dependent upon whether the person who's passed away reaches a resolution around the life they're leaving and the letting go of that, and the fact that they are dying, and the unconscious mind that's been accumulated and the processing of it. And this is a deep subject, perhaps it needs to be tackled separately, but during those days, someone who's passed away will still be in the proximate environment, not this dimension, but in the location, in the locale, but in a non-physical dimension of consciousness, of spirit, let's say. Now we can continue to offer loving kindness, to share our love if we haven't managed to at the bedside, because sometimes it happens that someone dies and we haven't been able to be there with them. We can be with that person who's died after their death for about 7 days, or up until the time, often until the time of the funeral. That's often a point of transition and setting free. And much can be said about that. The way that we set someone free to go upon their way, the focused intent around a funeral can be a very, very opportune moment to liberate someone and help them pass on. So, yeah, all of these things, all of these subjects could be discussed in great detail. But there will be a point where you no longer feel the presence of that person that you've lost. The feeling that they could just walk into the room at any moment. That's something that there will be a point when it will go. And at that point, that person has moved on and now is really genuinely transitioning into their next life, wherever that will be. So this interim period, in the same way that the lead up to death can be very, very definitive in how we go through death and how we wander on, so too that immediate period after death, before we actually leave this life behind finally in spirit and transition onwards. So we can help hold the space and encourage inner work for one who's passed away. And sometimes someone, let's say, who hasn't got much spiritual context in their life while they were alive and wasn't particularly open to such things as, making amends, making merit, forgiveness, letting go, all of these kind of things. As they die and they enter into just spirit, they leave the physical body, they are now aware that this body isn't the ground of their being, and they are more spiritually conscious. So it can be the case that one who was not that approachable with spiritual ideas prior to death may be able to make progress with regards to spiritual transformation immediately after death. And that's where holding space, setting up a shrine, a seat, maybe going to the place that they like to sit in and putting a candle and a picture of them and basically communing with that person in your quiet space after they've died can be extremely healing to you, but extremely liberating to them. And then there will come a point where that person has passed on. And that, what happens at that moment, I think is the subject of another discourse and what governs that. Suffice to say here that a tremendous amount of work can be done that contributes to that state of wandering on at the end of this life, in that period leading up to the death and in that period immediately after. And the final thing I'd like to say here is, as someone who's lost someone they love, our tendency is to, they're finally at peace. And assume that now that their physical pain is over, they are at peace. There is work to do in the dying process to reach a place of genuine peace. And not everybody finds that automatically. And so often it is the case, and this is extremely important in a situation where one who has faced a very challenging death and has not had the opportunity to make much merit in the lead up to it, or perhaps hasn't made much merit in their life. When they die, just to assume that they're at peace is not to serve them as best as we can. We might not like the idea that they may still be suffering, but we may be able to do something to help them. And this is where the idea and notion of merit comes in. Now, the idea of a memorial used to be the case where we would come together, a group would come together in remembrance of one who's passed and offer up a group field of merit in support of that person. Now, to support somebody who has faced great hardship and is still facing great hardship, and to help them transition to a higher state of being that is not such hardship, may well require a significant amount of merit. And that's where group effort is relevant. So I was going to talk about sharing of merits. I'm not going to. It's already nearly an hour that I've spoken. We've covered it off before. We will do a meditation on sharing of merits. But, just to say I share my merits with this person, may they be free from suffering. We need to dedicate merit. We need to reflect upon the merit that we want to offer up. And sometimes even to go and make merit on someone's behalf so that we can share that merit. And there are lots of ways we can do it. But, to gather together to create, I don't know, even if it's to create a fund that then can be used to alleviate the suffering of others, and then to transfer that merit to the person who's passed away, that's a very powerful thing. And also, going back to, in the time before dying, making merit in the time before our death through acts of generosity. We may not be able to go and be of service now that we are incapacitated, but through generosity, where we might give our possessions in a really considered way, not just maybe to our children, obviously that's something we would want to do, but to do it, to give part of what we have, and sometimes maybe even a significant part, really considerately towards a cause that genuinely alleviates the suffering of others. That is a great merit, and one that should be more encouraged. The giving away what we can't take with us, in a way we should all give everything that we can't take with us. In the lead up to our death, before we've even come close to our death, we should start to give and give and give, because generosity is one of the ways we can accumulate merit, and to do things that others benefit from starts to become our field of merit, and that's one of the things we can carry with us. So, if we've lived a life of regret and remorse, one of the ways we can rectify that is to make as much merit we can out of the things that aren't going to be going with us. To give our possessions in a considerate way, to give any financial accumulation of resources we might have, to carefully place them in such a way that it multiplies as merit. This is a very, very wonderful thing to do, and we can do it. We don't need these things anymore. To create a complicated situation where there's a load of possessions that haven't been allocated thoughtfully, that is a great vexation to those who are left behind as well. And we don't get the merit of it if we leave others to decide what to do with our possessions. So handing over what we've accumulated so that it's given back before we pass is another wonderful merit. And if we are supporting someone who's passed, who maybe hasn't done that, then maybe we've inherited from someone who's left us great good fortune, then to give a proportion of that in remembrance of them turns their gift to us as maybe their son or daughter into a merit that then can support them going forward. Okay, well, look, I know it's such a big subject, I could continue. I just wanted to share some reflections. I'm not going to pretend that this is a formal teaching on spiritual care in death and dying. These are reflections that I wanted to share with you because I think they're really important, and I hope that they're going to be useful to you. So I'm going to leave it at that. Maybe we can have, I don't know, let's see what the feedback is in the chat group, some follow-up at some point. But for now, all I'd like to do is I'm going to blank the screen and invite you, should you wish, to reflect on the field of merit that might be your life, your good fortune, if you have good fortune, has come on account of the past accumulation of merit. Your good deeds in this life, those deeds that others are the benefit from, as well as your own self-care, appropriate self-care, is your merit. So let's gather now, and as we do this every now and then, let's offer up merits. It's happening all the time that we're losing Around us, we're losing those who we care for and we love. Members of our group pass away from time to time. And since we last did a sharing of merit, a number of people who were very dear to us have passed away. So I just invite you, and now I'm not going to do this in a prescriptive way. I'm not going to chant the sharing of merits. I'm just going to hold a silent space. As I blank the screen now, I'm going to hold a silent space and invite you to just tune in quietly. Perhaps all the reflections that you've just made listening to me talk, let them sort of work upon you. Tune in to how you're feeling, let your heart settle like water. Relax down into your posture, let your spirit settle, let your heart base calm down. Land the insight that might have come to you through hearing these words. Reflect upon how you might consciously, mindfully apply it to your own life and to the care that one day, or maybe perhaps even now, you are giving or will give, or will be called upon to give to others facing the end of their life. We will all face death. It's a certainty. To come into being is to inevitably face, meet, and go through the end and passing away of this life. Reaching a state of peace and acceptance of that is one of the highest spiritual staging posts on the path out of suffering. It is worthy of significant reflection and inner work. So perhaps you are yourself afraid of dying. While we sit together in this quiet and loving space, if you yourself have a fear of death, tune into your heart now and stay with it as your mind becomes quiet. And as you rest in the stillness that is surrounding you, recognize that the light of your heart does not grow dimmer with the fading of your mind, but grows brighter. That light that reveals itself when you enter into a state of stillness, a moment of stillness, is the ground of your being. It is the ground of your being that you will return to at the end of this life. And it will sit there in the background as the contents of your mind display themselves before you. Do not get lost in appearances, thinking this is me and mine. It is just a display of mind. It is clinging to it as me and mine that binds us to it and makes it karma. Let it go. When you meet the end of your life, you will be confronted with the clear light that is the ground of your being. And simultaneously, with the illusory display of your entire mind. If you identify with that mind as me and mine now, you will surely identify with it in your moment of passing. And in doing so, you may fail to recognize what is blazing before you. The transcendent, luminous, spacious, utterly peaceful ground of your being. Tune in now, together, in remembrance of all those loved ones who have passed away these past months. Let us offer up this prayer. Wherever you may be now, whatever may be appearing in your mind, whether it is exalted or whether it is terrifying, whether it is positive or negative, it is merely a display of mind. It arises from a ground of pure, luminous, fully awakened awareness that is free of conflict, that has never been in conflict, that is utterly at rest within itself. That is the very ground of what you are. You have a choice now. You may continue to turn in the display of your mind, believing it to be me and mine. And continue to turn in the cycle of coming into being and passing away, dependent upon the qualities of that mind. Or you may bring that mind to the highest state that it is capable of reflecting, which is one of profound and boundless love. By making the reflection, may all beings in all directions without exception be happy and peaceful and free from suffering. May I be happy and peaceful and free from suffering. I forgive completely and utterly myself for all my past misdeeds. What confusion, what suffering it must have been to bring me to such things. I pray no being shall continue to suffer on my account. I ask for forgiveness of all those who may have suffered on my account. Sukhino wa kemino hontu sabe sata bhavantu sukhitata. And as I forgive myself, so too I forgive all those who have inflicted harm upon me or caused me to suffer in any way. Whatever it is I may have done, unknown to me or unknown to them even, in the past that would cause them to bring suffering to me now, I pray for forgiveness as I forgive. May no being suffer on my account. Sukhino wa kemino hontu sabe sata bhavantu sukhitata. Let your heart be filled with loving kindness. Let your mind be filled with loving kindness. Let all your anger, hatred, rancor, resentment, pride, jealousy, anger, ill will dissolve into nothing but love. May all beings be happy. May I be happy. May all beings be happy. And so it is that you might generate within you, in the approach to death and through the dying process and in the days following on from death. So it is you might create within you an entirely positive and loving attitude that might lead you on to a state that is not rooted in suffering, though it is not free from suffering. To a renewed becoming where the ground of your being is love. And even though we will continue to suffer, the inevitable coming into being and passing away, the ripening and fruiting of our past misdeeds, the ripening and fruiting of our past merits. At least let us do what we can to make the very basis of the mind that our life stands upon rooted in love and kindness and generosity of spirit. While we continue to make our way home, until such time as we are ready to finally return to that very ground of our being and take that state of final and total rest in the luminous, vast, spacious, sky-like, pristine clarity of our own true nature. May all beings in all directions without exception come to remember, to recognize what is the ground of their being. Come to let go and relinquish all attachment and clinging to ideas of self that would prompt continuous arising of unwholesome states that bring us to suffering. And for as long as they may continue to come into being and pass away, may that coming into being be rooted in love and kindness and goodwill and compassion and gratitude. Sukhino va kemino hontu sabe sata bhavantu sukhitata. May all beings in all directions be happy and peaceful and free from suffering. If there is merit in these words that are spoken here, if there is merit in this gathering of wholesome mind, if there is merit in these reflections, let us offer it up in its entirety to all those beings who may feel the vibration of our mind now, who have passed away recently, or even further in the past, who we may have loved in some way, who may have been dear to us, who have been part of our community, or close to us in other ways. Let us share this field of merit with a prayer that you may be happy and peaceful and free from suffering. If you have not yet recognized that the life you had has ended, recognize it now. Recognize the clear light of awareness that remains as the mind that you have grown accustomed to fades, as your identification with the life you had before fades. May you be at peace. Sukhino va kemino hontu sabe sata bhavantu sukhitanta. All conditioned things are impermanent. Decay is inherent in all compound things. That which is of the nature to arise is of the nature to pass away. It is not the arising and passing of things that is the cause of our suffering, but our attachment, craving, clinging, aversion, anger, and ill will towards them. All that is clung to can be let go. Sabe Dhamma Hanatati Yada Panyaya Pasati Atani Bindati Duke Samago Visuddhya Sabe Dhamma Hanatati. All things are conditionally arisen. There is no inherent self. They are empty by nature, appearing only dependent upon conditions. While we identify and cling to the appearance of things, so we remain wrapped up in bondage to the cycle of rising and passing, of dependent origination. As we let go our identification with this as me and mine, more and more, step by step, so we enter into in stages. We return in stages to the ground of our being, which has never been in conflict, which is always and always has been and always will be in a state of peace. All that is clung to can be let go. May all beings be happy. May I be happy and peaceful. May all beings be happy and peaceful. May I be happy and peaceful. May all beings be happy and peaceful. Suki no ake me no hantu sabe sata bhavantu suki tata. May all beings be happy. May all beings be happy. May all beings be happy. All right, thank you everyone for gathering together. I pray that this field of merit that we generate together may shine a light in the hearts of those who have recently passed. May they all be happy and peaceful and free from suffering.
Laye Jini Jabba Jini Shosa Jetamada Mayo De Chandra Gelon Shalai Mandana Chebram Babe Rekze Duje Dala Jinjela Seve Dazo Lamna Gombe Dala Mandana Nebe Dazo Barze Sochi Barze Jiro Nanje Barze Nandozo Sanve Barze Yezo Jibe Jazo Jazo Pama Beza Guru Pema Sadewa Palma Danye Bala Do Dema Junye Dama Beyo Kale Lado Do Kangrai Shame Damla Da Tamje Lavo Nidu Do Tangla Yeshe Damla Hebori Yaku Do Laze Damje Damla Da Teve Lade Damje Je Lade Zunje Ningbo Bo Lale Temba Songwa Je Lale Tendo Chala Je Dodai Zojo Dabo Je Tokje Dala Shinje La Zewe Dazo Lamna Dong Gombe Dala Mudo Zo Nube Dazo Barje Zo Chi Barje Jeru Zo Nanje Barje Nando Zai Zawe Barje Yinzo Zo Jube Jazai Jazo Oma Awan Benza Guru Bema Zide Wa Damba Chuje Demba Zaze Dobra Zube Je Zamye Maje Lenje Yalbo Gomba Darje Je Jejo Subje Zaya Zo Jine Bema June Je Jine Bema Zamba Jine Zuje Dorje Je Sanje Dorje Rabo Zo Dorje Dalai Jinje Lai Zave Dazo Lamna Gombe Dalai Mudu Zo Nebe Dazo Barje Zo Chi Barje Jero Zo Nanje Barje Naro Zo Sanve Barje